Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm coming to you with another video, and this time I want to go over my January 2025 reading log. I actually managed to read 11 books in the month of January, 10 of which were physical, and one was digital, despite the fact that I struggle very hard to read digital books. It actually hurts my eyes. And I want to go over all of these books one by one and kind of talk about them a little bit. So let's just jump right into it. The first book I read this year was Breach of Peace by Daniel B. Green. Now, Daniel is, definitely known here on YouTube as he's one of, if not the most prominent booktubers on the platform. I mean, when you think of booktube, there's a pretty good chance that you think of Daniel Green, and for very good reason. The man is very good at what he does. But as a writer, I found him to be interesting. I think that this book had a lot of promise, but I also don't believe it was meant to be written at the length that it was as a novella. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars because it had a really engaging plot and an interesting idea, but it felt like this was meant to be a longer story that was trimmed down because he didn't know how to extend it. And while I do know that Rebels Creed is a longer novel, I can't help but feel like this was meant to be more than just an introductory novella. So 3 out of 5 for Breach of Peace. Now, the same day that I read Breach of Peace, I read The Ice Dragon by George R.R. Martin. And this is meant to be a children's story, and in a way it is, and in a way it's not, because there are some brutal depictions, some brutal scenes mentioned in this book, such as people walking around with burned flesh falling from their body, and one guy with an axe embedded in the skull. So it can get pretty brutal. But the illustrations in this book are absolutely gorgeous, and the story told within it is really compelling. I mean, to me, it reads like a children's story that old Nan would have read to Bran back in Winterfell. It has that kind of A Song of Ice and Fire feeling to it. And this predates The Song of Ice and Fire. It's not directly related in any way, according to Martin, although I could believe it to be a story within that universe. But you can definitely tell a lot of things in that series were drawn from this. He pulled from his earlier work with A Song of Ice and Fire. So if you are a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, read The Ice Dragon. It's definitely worth your time, even if you're not a child. After that, I read Jocko the Galactic Patrolman by Akira... Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. This got a 4 out of 5. After that, I read Jocko the Galactic Patrolman by Akira Toriyama. This is sort of the official prequel to the Dragon Ball series, but it's also a standalone reading experience. Now, yes, this is a manga. So if you're a literature snob who doesn't consider, graphic novels and manga to be legit forms of literature, you may be upset that I'm even counting this, but I definitely consider it to be such. It's a great sci-fi read, very comedic, very fun, and yeah, it does retcon a little bit the origins of Goku and the Saiyans on planet Earth, but in a way that better fits with the current continuity of the series, so it was definitely necessary. 4 out of 5 star read, very fun, very entertaining, especially if you already like Jocko. Moving into the next book, I read Even If This Love Disappears Tonight. Now, I am a fantasy sci-fi guy who occasionally will read other genres, but I've never really read a true romance book before, and I have to say, Misaki Ichijo wrote one hell of a compelling and heartfelt story. This is a light novel, which basically means the prose are very simple in order to make it very easy and digestible for readers of all ages. So if you are a prose snob, it may not be your thing. However, what I can say is that this story moved me to tears. This was a beautiful love story with tragedy, comedy, happiness, and pretty much every emotion you could ever expect, despite it being a pretty short read. This is a 5-star book. This is a 5-star book. Absolutely incredible novel. After that, I read A Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. I loved A Game of Thrones. I gave A Game of Thrones 4.5 out of 5 stars, and A Clash of Kings took me a similarly really long time to read. Something about Martin's books, his A Song of Ice and Fire books anyways, take me quite a while to get through. I think it took me a month to read A Game of Thrones, and it took me about as long to read A Clash of Kings, and actually I think I know why. And it's not their doorstopper-like nature. I've read longer books in a shorter span of time. I think what it is is with all the different character POV jumps, I've realized that I find myself dreading reading certain character POVs. Like in A Clash of Kings and a Game of Thrones, I didn't give a damn about Sansa's POVs, and in The Clash of Kings, I felt they outright weren't necessary outside of maybe two. Um, and A Clash of Kings felt more to me like a setup novel than it did like a grand installment in the series in and of itself. Its greatest claim to fame was the Battle of Blackwater, which I found to be fairly boring, honestly. Still, I gave the book 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a very good read. I'm excited to get into A Storm of Swords sometime later this year, hopefully. I liked it, but I don't think it's as good as A Game of Thrones was. Maybe I should turn these around. Next up, I read the sequel to Even If This Love Disappears Tonight, which is Even If These Tears Disappear Tonight, which is a sequel, but not in the way you would expect, because this doesn't follow, the characters that were the main couple of the first book. This follows the girl's best friend, okay? And I won't get into it too much, because again, if I talk about this book too deeply, I'll spoil the first book, but it follows her friend, her journey through college, and her own struggles with feelings that she harbors towards, a specific individual, and how she's going to move on from that. And while not as compelling as the first book, I still found this to be a very good read. I smiled a lot. I laughed a little bit. I did feel sad at times, but it didn't capture the same huge emotional impact of the first book. But I still gave it a 4 out of 5. It's still a good read. If you liked Even If This Love Disappears Tonight, then Even If These Tears Disappear Tonight would be a good book for you. Next, though, we have Fever Dream by George R.R. Martin. I've been reading a lot of Martin here lately, and holy hell, I adored this one. This was such a fantastic book. This is a 5 out of 5 book. It is the most unique take on a vampire story I have ever experienced, and God knows vampires are in desperate need of something fresh and original, and this delivered on that in the best possible ways, which I absolutely loved. But also, I think something about this book that doesn't get enough praise in online reviews is Martin's incredibly intelligent use of language. So this is set around the time of the Civil War, and let's just say it is very period accurate with its language and how it refers to issues of racism and slavery and so on and so forth. But when we jump between Abner's point of view, our good guy, and our bad guy's point of view, we see a stark contrast in how characters in Group A talk about people of color versus in Group B. When we're looking at the bad guy's point of view, yeah, you're going to hear every slur you could ever imagine. You're going to hear hard R's. You're going to hear terrible racism accurate to the time period. But when you're from Abner's point of view, neither he nor his workers talk about people like that. In fact, they use some of the most polite terms, some of the most, acceptable terms of that era that still would be unacceptable by today's standards, but to the period showed a level of respect. He never used the N-word in referring to the black workers aboard his ship. In fact, his workers were all freed men, at least one of which we know he freed himself. And instead of calling them these awful words, he would call them black, or he would call them colored. And again, while still harsh by today's standards, it shows a level of respect and decency that Abner had that other characters of the time period maybe didn't have. And we see kind of not only his growth as he's coming to terms with all the vampire shit that's going on in the book, but also growth as an individual, as a person, when it comes to matters of race. So it's incredibly intelligent from the human perspective. It's incredibly intelligent from the vampire perspective. It's incredibly intelligent from the language perspective. The plot was engaging. The first third of the book is a little bit slow, and it does read like George R.R. Martin was on a steamboat kick, but I loved it, and I strongly recommend it. This is a 5 out of 5 star book. Just absolutely fantastic story of vampires, of humanity, of growth, and of steamboats. Next up, Supernatural, One Year Gone. I'm trying to read a Supernatural book every month this year so I can get through the rest of my tie-in novels. And Rebecca Dessertine just doesn't seem to understand the characters in the show she used to work on. And that is mind-boggling to me. The other book she wrote was War of the Suns, which was a fairly bad book. It was a 2.5 out of 5-star book. Somehow this is worse. This is a 2-star read, guys. She could not be further from Dean's character. She got Sam's character right in this book, but to be fair, it's sold as Sam in this book, so it's kind of impossible to screw that up. Although there were a few issues even with sold as Sam, where she was like, yeah, he felt like a flicker of emotion and then it went away. No, he didn't feel a damn emotion at all. Emotion and supernatural are tied to the soul. Sam has no soul at this point in the series, therefore Sam feels no emotions of any kind at any level, unless he's faking. And this book writes it as if he did feel something, but just for a moment, which is not how the series operates. The language in this book is not true to the CW show, so it's a little bit jarring in that way. And the plot is just so wildly all over the place. I mean, first of all, Dean is looking for a Necronomicon, the book from H.P. Lovecraft's fiction. And apparently there's more than one. It's not the Necronomicon, it's a Necronomicon. There's many Necronomicon. Oh, and by the way, the Necronomicon just happens to have a spell that would, raise Lucifer. So that whole apocalypse thing, that whole 66 seal thing, just get the right spell book. You could raise them. And that's the whole plot. Dean's looking for that because he wants to raise Sam from the cage, even if he has to raise Lucifer with him. So he goes to Salem, and like Dean always would, he pulled Lisa and Ben with him to, put them in harm's way for no good reason. Something Dean would never do. He would insist on going alone. But no, he makes it into a family trip and brings them into it. And guess what? Yeah, predictably, they're put in danger and they're captured. And at one point, Dean's on a pirate ship fighting ghost pirates. Okay. And then towards the end of the book, he enlists the help of a group of young black gangsters, teenagers, to get firearms to go fight a coven of witches underground. Okay. And at the end of the book, he slits the throat of one of these black teenagers because he needs a sacrifice to banish these demonic creatures back to hell. And the kid was already shot, so Dean figured why not? Because that's a thing Dean would totally do. Book is trash. Moving next, I read The Armageddon Rag by George R.R. Martin. Yep, another damn George Martin book this month. And I have to say, as a working musician, this was a very, very interesting read for me. Because Martin really seemed to understand the music scene and the controversies, the dynamics, the nuance of it all. But I went into this book expecting, a fantasy horror book. And it is those things with a caveat. What this book really is a murder mystery book. Think of it like a sandwich. Okay? For the first layer of bread, we have fantasy. For the middle, for the meat, we have murder mystery. And for the second layer of bread, we have horror. Okay? You put that together, you have a nice sandwich. It should be balanced. Well, the bread is razor thin in this book, meaning the fantasy and horror elements are razor thin. And it really revolves more around a murder mystery, investigative type of story. And it does very, very well at that. In fact, the book is at its best when it's going over the investigative elements and the music elements. The horror, it's kind of weak, to be honest with you. The fantasy elements, we've got this weird, raising the dead thing, kind of, that's never really explained. And that's the book's biggest fault. For as great as it reads as a mystery novel, for as great as it reads as, a story of music, it doesn't really deliver on the rest in a way that I found very satisfying. The ending was kind of a letdown, but the journey was damn interesting, and I do recommend reading it. It's a 3.5-star book, for sure. The digital book that I read was Bleach: Letters from the Other Side, which is a novelization of early chapters from the manga, 2.5 out of 5, completely unneeded, didn't add anything to the story. If you've already read the manga, skip the novel. And then finally, I read book 2 in the Cleric Quintet, which is in Sylvan Shadows. And I'm happy to say that I liked it much better than I liked Canticle. I found Catterley's continued growth to be incredibly engaging, as well as his inner turmoil to be quite compelling and believable. His and Danica's relationship is more nuanced in this book and, a bit more strained at times, especially as we see Catterley struggling with the fact that he had to kill somebody in the first book, despite him being devoted to a life of peace. And now they're at war. His current mission, he's aiding the elves of the forest of Shelmasta against an invading band of goblins, orcs, ogres, and giants. And yeah, if this sounds very Tolkien, it's because it is. This is extremely Lord of the Rings, but in the best possible ways, with great breakneck action and compelling characters and relationships. So I really enjoyed In Sylvan Shadows. It's the way I ended my month. It was my 11th book this month. In January, anyways. And I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. If you want to read my written reviews for any of these books, they are all on my Goodreads account, which I will link in the description down below. Definitely can't wait to read some more books in the month of February. And I'm starting February with, what's the official name, of the book? The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne is the book I'm starting my February off with. So hopefully I'll make another reading wrap up for February. But until then, I'll see you next time. Peace. Take care.